Good morning, everyone. Hello, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm actually very honored to be here with you and take part in this event with this promising and very beautiful title, Redefining and Reimagining GLAM Institutions in the Digital Era. It is actually a title and a topic that I feel very deeply connected to, and the fact that you made it here today from different parts of Indonesia shows me that you feel the same. I wanted to talk to you about something that I have been thinking a lot about as a social and cultural scientist. What is it that people value most about museums, libraries, and archives? And how can these institutions continue to be relevant, to be important for people today? After all, many of them exist already several decades, right? Some have been established even long before the invention of the television, and today, nowadays, communication technologies seem to open up new ways to reimagining GLAM institutions, such as galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. However, I don't want to talk about technologies. I'd rather talk about people, what we want, what we're afraid of, and how we can actually overcome all that to collaborate and to work together for a common vision. When I was about 18 or 19 or so just before high school graduation, one of my best friends invited me to visit her in London. She moved there for a while, a few months or so, to gain experience as a kindergarten teacher. And as you can imagine, back then, at that age, I was very excited to go, to see her, of course, and also because it was the first time for me in another big city. Because my friend was working during the day and I had some time off, I used it to explore the city a bit on my own. And I was actually really surprised because there was so much to see, the architecture and the culture and all the museums that I really like to attend whenever I visit other countries. And I was actually also fairly lucky because the weather was actually quite good and the food wasn't as bad as they actually say. But what really stuck in my head until this day was the street art and the graffiti art that could be found really everywhere throughout the city. And you could actually take one of these art tours that would take you to the districts and where you would have this guide showing you around and showing you what he called the best open art gallery in town. Street art is actually quite an interesting social phenomenon because it does create tension, because in a public space, it challenges this notion of ownership and addresses this fundamental question of who may have access to art. But street art is also an art form, right? It creates joy, it contributes to the city landscapes, and it makes the neighborhoods much more colorful and enjoyable. I think for the artist, the city is considered the canvas, this creative foundation that gives him or her the space to show their perspective on society and on the world. And these perspectives may be very artistic, like this one. These perspectives may be really beautiful and colorful. And at times, they may be really surprisingly direct. These artworks really burst of creativity. And creativity as a form of doing and making, it has clear intentions and goals, and it uses cultural elements. This graffiti right here actually plays a lot with this common behavior of tourists to capture all the city monuments in one picture that then prove, yes, congratulations, you have been there. I think it's hardly possible to think of creativity without including culture, right? And you can't think of culture without recognizing this very, very creative element. As you know, culture enables us to live not only in the present and the past and the future, but what's more, it enables us to live in the possible. And imagination plays actually quite a crucial role here, because it is a process that helps us to relate with absence, with what is not there or not there yet. But imagination does actually a bit more than that. It supports the exchange of our positions and allows us to take different perspectives to create something new, to create new meaning. Now, let's think about museums, libraries, and archives. They can truly serve as places to discover by different perspective making and different perspective taking. And they can truly serve as places to imagine, right? And indeed, these institutions have given themselves really great and ambitious and important missions, like providing access to knowledge, preserving cultural heritage for future generations, encouraging social inclusion, and contributing to people's education. In all that struggle that cultural institutions face in today's world, I think that we sometimes forget what these institutions are actually made for. What is their main purpose? What really makes them good and relevant and important is their purpose to make a difference in the quality of individual lives. Stephen Weil, a legal expert in the arts and a museum administrator, argued that cultural institutions are not business-driven institutions. They are purpose-driven ones. And as a museum professional, he argued further that there are actually various ends that museums, in this case, may pursue. And he also offered quite a broad list of choices. And these choices really meet various needs of people, of communities, like educational needs, spiritual needs, social and physical needs, but also psychological and economic ones. Museums, just like libraries and archives, provide forms of public service. They really inspire individual achievements in the art and in the sciences. They serve to strengthen family and other personal ties, and I actually heard that people are dating inside of these institutions. They are also sites for informal learning, because much of the world's history is not only taught at schools. They can also act as advocates and as mediators to inspire respect for people's rights and for our natural environment, just like we witness at the moment all around the world, where GLAMs are actually joining and contributing to the Friday for Future protests. In that way, if we try to consider the vast areas in which cultural heritage institutions are active today, I think that it's actually pretty safe to say that they are very flexible and responsive institutions, right? That the modern society has available for its use. If we're exploring this question of relevance, we have to keep in mind that GLAMs are institutions that are made for and by people. Thus, we as a society should not evaluate them so much on the resources that they have at their disposal, like money or the size of the stuff or even the size of their collection, but we should evaluate them based on how eager and how ambitious they are to connect to people and to work towards accomplishing their mission, and which is the reason for their existence, right? In our world today, cultural institutions might and need to, sadly, compete for public support and attention, not only with one another, but also with other institutions, and especially the entertainment industries. But the thing is that cultural heritage institutions have actually way more to offer than entertainment. Even if people don't visit them, they do trust them. They trust that the information they find there is reliable and that it's valid. And I think this is of huge value, because trust is actually the main ingredient for participation and for social inclusion. And from my perspective, this is like the real power of GLAMs. If GLAMs focus entirely on securing their resources, which is of course a means, not an ends, we lose sight of what really is important. And unlike businesses, whose goal of course it is to make and to generate money, GLAMs use these resources for a much, much different purpose, namely to serve the greater good. You see, if you can't travel, if you can't go to the library, and if you can't go to the museum, but you can go to Wikipedia, you can go to Flickr, you can go to Wikimedia Commons or elsewhere to find the information that you are looking for. And people actually do that. And there are GLAMs that support them. Focusing on their core mission, many institutions embark on the journey to make their digital collection and knowledge freely accessible and usable for the world community. And this is what we call open. They do this by letting go of control and authority, and by serving people as a source of inspiration and imagination, actually just like the street artist who uses culture as an integral element in his or her works to create new meaning. GLAMs really change their perspective in regard to ownership and their role, from being gatekeepers in a digital age to becoming true enablers of knowledge sharing and collaboration. GLAMs are actually opening up in all places all around the world, so not just in Germany and Berlin, where I come from, but also in Argentina, in Belgium, in Poland, Bulgaria, Canada, Taiwan, in Finland, in Israel, in Hungary, in Japan, in New Zealand, in Indonesia, and in many, many other countries of the world. So now you may wonder, what happens when physical objects go digital? Well, I think they become very highly useful resources for people. Let's have a look at a digital representation of an object. This is a scan of various beetles collected in an insect box. This atlas beetle, like the one in the circles, is a very, very large species of beetles found in Southeast Asia, and this is actually a male, and you can see that by these 3 horns. These animals have been collected several hundreds years ago. You can find these insect boxes in the Museum of Natural History in Berlin, in Germany. In addition, this scan is also part of the high-resolution digital collection that the museum also made available for everyone online. You can download this, and you can do whatever you want with it. In our century, 200 years later, 2 hardware developers and artists, Kati and Tommy, decided to use this digital copy in their own work, in their own art installation, what they called the cyber beetle. This is the cyber beetle, and this is how it works. Did you spot all the other objects and beetles inside of this video? This project is a remix of actually various materials that are found inside of museums. The leaves in the movie are from the Botanical Gardens open collection. Some selection of the music are actually real recordings of animal sounds that the History Museum also provided for reuse as well. And I think this remix really revives these animals, right? It makes the experience really hearable and touchable and enjoyable in many different ways. And when Kati and Tommy actually presented their video and this installation to the museum staff for the first time, one of the museum professionals actually said, well, that's evidence that other people have always better idea than we do. They liked it because it was a much different, a much more engaging and interactive approach to their collection. And in fact, the museum staff liked this beetle so much that they decided to include it in their own exhibition. And after this museum residency, this little electronic fella ended up traveling all around the world. And actually, wherever he goes, Open GLAM magic follows. So I really think it's time that it made it here to New Zealand, to Indonesia. The beetle was also a star guest in a TV series for kids produced in Germany. And I think we can agree that we are dealing with quite a celebrity beetle by now. But digital content is not just used by artists and software developers and designers like Kati and Tommy, who seek to find new material for their inspiration and to create something new. Freely accessible and usable digital collections also find their pathways in our everyday life, and people use these images to print them on pillow cushions, on cups, on postcards, to send them to their loved ones. They also put them up on their walls as painting because they simply like the artwork. And I think this is great impact. If people visit your museum and they like the art so much that they want to see it every day, I think this is great impact. Think about what art and culture could actually do in the media, in our classrooms, and in research if the knowledge and expertise is shared openly. If digital objects become freely accessible and usable, they too become more useful for cultural institutions. And I want to do a little experiment with you, and I hope you're very open to that. Think about how many objects, how many books, and how many archival materials you actually have collected. Please think about a number, an estimate. How many objects did your institutions collect? Now, think about how much of your collection is actually physically accessible for the public. Can you show me your hand if it's more than 50%? More than 50% of your collection that is accessible? Yeah? Okay. Show me your hand if the collection is actually less than 20% accessible. Show me your hand. Less than 20% accessible? Yeah? Oh, yeah, cool. Wonderful. But don't worry, that's actually not much, but you're not alone, right? And I actually pulled some numbers for you to compare, because one of the biggest institutions around the world actually have really less to show. The Tate, for example, shows about 20% of its permanent collection, the Louvre about 8%, Guggenheim a lowly 3%, and the wonderful Berlin-based museum, the Berlinische Galerie, whose mandate it is to show, to preserve, and to collect art made in the city, only shows 2% of its entire holdings. Why is it like that? Well, because physical space is obviously limited inside of these institutions, and Some artifacts are just maybe just too fragile to handle, so you're not allowed to touch it and to show it, right? But if you have digital copies, let your collection be discovered and be useful for the communities and the people you serve who may otherwise never be able to see what you have collected. Openly accessible and usable digital objects lead to much higher visibility of the images and also of the institutions, locally and globally. And this means that these institutions can reach a much broader audience with the important work that they do. Freely usable digital objects can also connect better to local, regional, and international programs that encourage research in the field of cultural heritage. When my team and I organized our first Coding Da Vinci event in 2014, there were actually 3 different institutions working on the topic of Jewish heritage in Germany and in Europe. And the funny thing was that they only discovered each other's work because all of them released the data and the images freely online, and because they came there with a different mindset. They came there to cooperate. They did not know that another institutions actually had valuable data for their own work. And this means that institutions can benefit too from open collections and data that they release. And we all can benefit if the knowledge is interlinked. Open GLAM began as a grassroots movement, but has grown to become a very core principle in the cultural sector. And in Germany today, many institutions are working on integrating these principles of openness, of sharing and collaboration into their digital strategic directions for audience development to reach audiences online, because they are different, they have different needs, in their educational program, and also in their marketing, because there are new opportunities to get funding for the work that you do. Cultural institutions, I think, are really good in making sense of the past and the last centuries. So it may be scary or challenging sometimes to look into the future, but imagine what we could achieve through a change of perspective in regard to ownership and the role of our institutions. What could happen if GLAMs become true enablers and strong advocates for free knowledge sharing by using all means available to us, digital and physical, to focus on our mission and to actively work toward its accomplishment by using the power of public trust? And I hope you agree with me that it's actually not a new role that cultural institutions play. It's rather the extension of their existing mission into the digital space, which normal people don't distinguish so much between digital and physical spaces. We just use it every day. I think that museums, libraries, and archives are and will be very valuable sources of trusted information for people. But we need to share it as far as possible, so that through the creative use and through different use cases and the combination of all the little pieces of knowledge shared and found everywhere in our world today, we can actually make sense of humanity. Thank you.